Intelligence in schools. How conventional schooling contributes to a misunderstanding of intelligence and undermines success. My name is Carissa Cassiel. This is a recent picture of myself and my 4-year-old son. I was a public school student. I struggled a lot in school, but I was pretty good at taking tests. I was also really good with interpersonal relationships, and by bargaining with teachers, I managed to get decent grades. I was always told I was really smart, but I didn't feel smart. I had some undiagnosed learning disabilities that made my school experience quite miserable and traumatizing. I had to withdraw from several semesters of college before I dropped out entirely. Instead, I created a successful career as a nanny in California. Through nannying in different households, I got to explore many different approaches to schooling. This picture is of one of the children I nannied for at an amazing school I will discuss later on in the presentation. My experience at this school changed my understanding of what could be possible, and 10 years later still remains the only school I would be interested in sending my own child to. When my niece reached school age, my sister and brother-in-law argued over whether to send her to school or to homeschool. I found it interesting that his main argument was that he did not feel like he was smart enough to teach his 5-year-old daughter. The idea that he wanted to send his daughter to the same school system that had left him feeling so unintelligent seemed a bit paradoxical to me. It falls perfectly in line with the content of this presentation. How did schooling set up his beliefs in intelligence in a way that he felt both that he was not intelligent and also that his daughter would not be able to learn without the specific approaches held as a standard by the public school system from which he graduated? In my opinion, he was easily intelligent enough to support his child's education. He just really didn't understand what intelligence truly is or how to learn. You could say that experience for me was a seed that has grown into this presentation. How do we understand intelligence, and how does that shape how we teach in schools? In turn, how do schools shape how we understand intelligence? Here's a quick guide to this presentation. First, we'll take a close look at intelligence. Then we're going to look at different schooling options. And then we'll look closer at intelligence and learning in the context of how schools operate. This quote by Sir Ken Robinson is a great summary of what I intend to demonstrate with this presentation. Human intelligence is richer and more dynamic than we have been led to believe by formal academic education. Initially, intelligence was seen as one general factor, referred to as the G factor. This was developed by Charles Spearman, a British psychologist around the turn of the 20th century. He actually invented the statistical method of factor analysis to figure out how certain skills might correlate with other skills. L.L. Thurston did not believe it was comprehensive to rank someone on a single scale and derived 7 clusters of mental abilities using 56 different tests. Both the G factor and the 7 mental abilities were incorporated into John B. Carroll's 3-strata model of intelligence. This does a great job of demonstrating that it doesn't have to be either or. There is an overall factor that correlates your scores over multiple types of intelligence tests, but there are also multiple types of intelligence to be tested. This presentation is specifically looking at intelligence through the lens of schooling. If you go off of these early theories of intelligence, formal school curriculum might seem quite comprehensive, from sequential reasoning and induction to crystallized knowledge, such as language and vocabulary. We also see memory, retrieval, processing speed, and so many other intellectual abilities and processes. Thankfully, research into intelligence didn't stop there. Howard Gardner did not feel that these intellectual elements of intelligence were comprehensive enough. He noticed that with brain damage or cases like savant syndrome, people can have very low ability in some areas and high or even genius level ability in others. He came up with 8 types of intelligence that cover far more than in the previous model. If we look closely at these, we see things normally focused on in schools, represented by linguistic, logical, mathematical, and we'll even say spatial is just a natural part of any school curriculum. We can say that it's not uncommon to also cover musical intelligence in schools, although some schools put it as a very low priority. This leaves a lot of significant areas of intelligence neglected. It's a lot of work to navigate intrapersonal intelligence, learning to tune into our own inner guidance, figure out who you are, what you need, and how you feel. We will all spend our lifetimes learning to understand ourselves, and schools rarely provide tools or teachings on how to navigate in this realm. The same goes for interpersonal intelligence. We need to figure out how to handle conflicts, assert boundaries, and develop healthy relationships. Schools also sorely lack teaching naturalistic intelligence. We do learn biology, but that's very different from being able to understand, interact with, and read the natural world around us. How do we grow our own food? How do we identify poisonous plants and venomous animals? Another area of intelligence grossly neglected by the school system is bodily kinesthetic. It's one thing to force kids to run laps or play dodgeball a couple times a week, but we will see later our body is a necessary tool for learning and growth. The school system at its core is made to break children down, sit still, and be quiet, which severely impacts their ability to learn. In the end, we think that sitting quietly and scoring high on an academic test is the best sign of intelligence, but this more comprehensive system makes it very obvious that there is so much more to intelligence than what we are made aware of in schools. Robert Sternberg broke down intelligence into 3 categories: analytical intelligence, creative intelligence, and practical intelligence. He also broke down creativity into 5 components. There are 2 main components I'd like to highlight for our purposes. The first is intrinsic motivation, which is broken down with an abundance of extrinsic rewards and punishments as we find in schools with grades and performance expectations. The second is the creative environment. In addition to support, feedback, and encouragement, this environment needs to provide time and space to think. Not only is there little, if any, downtime in schools in which to think, but that carries on to home life. Between homework, sports, and extracurriculars, family commitments, and the occasional socialization, children are often left with none of the space and time needed to foster their creativity. Imagination is the source of every form of human achievement, and it's the one thing that I believe we are systematically jeopardizing in the way we educate our children and ourselves. Another amazing quote by Sir Ken Robinson. And yet, when considering how smart someone is, it's common to go to the intelligent quotient test to get an impression on what we would consider someone's intelligence. What is your IQ? Are you smart enough to be in Mensa? As we've seen, that covers a very small glimpse of someone's actual intelligence. So where did the IQ test come from? All of this started at the end of the 19th century, with Charles Darwin looking into evolution and how we all evolved to have different traits and abilities. His cousin, Francis Galton, set forth to create ways to test these differences, and then James Cattell turned these into systematic mental tests. Around this time, schools became mandatory in France, and the psychologists Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon were hired to create a test to determine a child's mental age in order to help teachers determine how far along children were and who needed special attention. Eventually, Stanford professor Louis Terman revised Binet's test for adults in the US, creating the Stanford-Binet test. His tests were widely used for assessing new immigrants and World War I recruits. Terman did consider this measurement to be a label and was actually quoted saying he hoped his test could ultimately result in curtailing the reproduction of feeble-mindedness. This desire to limit who reproduces in an attempt to control traits is called eugenics and quickly gained a lot of popularity. An estimated 60,000 people were sterilized in the first half of the 20th century based on their low IQ scores. Hitler and the Nazis also used pseudoscience IQ tests to identify hundreds of thousands of people. They then sterilized or executed them in the name of developing a master race. All of these lives were lost based solely on such a limited understanding of intelligence, and that limited view of intelligence persists today. It's woven into the fabric of schools and academic curriculum. For this presentation, we're going to break up schooling into 3 different categories. Formal schooling is pretty self-explanatory. If you imagine a kid that goes to school in most any way, we'll consider that formal schooling for the purposes of this presentation. Homeschooling is also something that most people are familiar with. Typically, homeschooling indicates a family has taken the curriculum of school and applied it at home. Families can create schooling that is either strict or relaxed, but it is curriculum-led with intentions to follow an academic schedule. While homeschooling is curriculum-led, unschooling is entirely child-led, not adhering to curriculum or academic schedule. Let's look a little closer at unschooling. If you've never heard of it before, you're not the only one. When pressed, I define unschooling as allowing children as much freedom in the world as their parents can comfortably bear. This quote by John Holt is a great jumping off point for understanding unschooling. Unschooling is based on the theory that children have an innate interest in the world and are always learning. With unschooling, there is a focus on not replacing intrinsic motivation felt naturally by the child with the extrinsic motivation of grades, scores, and avoiding consequences. In his book, Growing Without Schooling, John Holt explains that children want to learn about the world, are good at it, and can be trusted to do it without much adult coercion or interference. What sets it apart from homeschooling is a lack of curriculum. Parents ask children what they are interested in learning and then work to facilitate that learning. They operate more as a librarian or guide than what we typically think of as a teacher. What a child learns is determined by who that child is and what they want to learn. Radical unschooling takes this freedom and trust and extends it beyond schooling and into the life of a child. Radical unschooling also removes the expectations and requirements from other aspects of a child's life, making things such as when to sleep, when and what to eat, and when to focus on learning all up to discussion with the child, allowing them as much freedom in these realms as the parents can comfortably bear. Dana Martin, a leading proponent of radical unschooling, has allowed cameras from shows like Wife Swap and Dr. Phil into her house to observe their lifestyle. In an interview with Dr. Phil, he asked if she worries that her children will be unprepared for the real world. She told him that it was actually her children who spend their entire lives within the real world. It was school students who spend the majority of their lives sitting at desks inside of buildings away from the real world. Now that is a perspective that definitely got me thinking. Now that we have seen that unschooling and radical unschooling are options, let's look closer at the curriculum focus and practice of schools and how they affect learning. This is a figure from the amazing book Smart Moves by Dr. Carla Hannaford. Within this image, she has compacted a tremendous amount of research. I'd like to bring your attention to a few areas. Here in the developmental area, we see that learning is inhibited by a lack of sensory information, touch, movement, interactive communication, and creative play. These all get quickly weeded out with the typical school environment to get students to focus on curriculum and excel academically. Here in the competition area, we see an increase in tests has been shown to inhibit learning. We also see that while students need movement and physical skill mastery to foster their innate intelligences, competitive sports inhibit learning as well. We also see here parental and societal expectations, which are common elements of schooling experiences for children, especially when adhering to a curriculum. Finally, she has a section on schooling itself, listing unintegrated curriculums that lack music, art, and daily movement, as well as developmentally inappropriate curriculums and learning style unawareness, rigid educational systems, and labels, all inhibiting learning. Some of these issues are about the focus on curriculum, but others are about the understandable limitations on schools to individualize curriculum and teaching styles to what actually works for individual children. There are just too many children and not enough teachers. Typical school perspectives on intelligence are missing a lot. Let's look more closely at some research behind learning and different kinds of intelligence. Given this academic curriculum focus for schooling, children are directed to sit still and not talk. Both talking and movement are critical for brain development and learning. Movement stimulates dopamine and other neurotrophins, stimulating brain growth, creating new nerve cells and connections. It also causes our brain to function more efficiently as we master physical skills. In 2001, the California Department of Education matched SAT-9 scores with the FitnessGram physical fitness scores. In almost 1 million students from between grades 5, 7, and 9, a correlation was shown between much higher academic achievement and physical fitness. Better executive function has also been shown in those with higher levels of fitness. In the end, we're all fundamentally animals programmed for survival. We learn best when we have sensory input, movement, and personal emotional connection. It is our limbic system that sorts through the onslaught of information we are bombarded with moment by moment and attributes meaning, value, and survival potential based on our past experiences. So much of what we do depends on being accepted in a group, and this is never so active and overwhelming as it is in the teenage brain. School can be overly social in alienating ways, creating an environment that is extremely detrimental to learning when we are sorting out where we belong in such a temporary and often harsh social ecosystem of middle school or high school. Teachers often lament that their role becomes that of disciplinarian rather than educator. Teenagers often do not feel safe, loved, or accepted, which are key components to a calm and receptive nervous system that would be primed for learning. Instead, learning turns into a fight for survival, leaving no room to enjoy it and a high chance of failing miserably. As mentioned before, the current school systems leave very little time for growing minds to digest all they're being taught, a crucial part of learning. Dr. Carla Hannaford writes in her book Smart Moves, intuition, emotion, vision, humor, rhythmic movement, image formation, and other Gestalt brain capacities are not practiced, tested, or particularly valued at school. School is very lopsided, and many students suffer and end up exhibiting stressed out, survival-oriented human behavior. because of this bias. My niece is 11 now, and she has been in school ever since my sister gave up the battle and sent her to kindergarten. In general, she's been doing great, but last year she hit a wall and really started to struggle in some areas. I had a little powwow with her and helped her sort through some experiences. Just like in this infographic, she felt humiliated and unworthy simply because she had reached a level that was no longer simple and easy for her. I focused on helping her shift to a growth mindset. She had already been taught to believe that she was either smart or dumb. Her entire attitude around school was able to shift with the simplest understanding that everyone struggles in some areas or another, but what makes someone really bright and successful is knowing how to persevere through failures and not take them personally. I explained to her that she will hit countless hurdles while she learns, and it's her job to ask for help and seek guidance every time. That's it. Her job isn't to be smart, it's to enjoy the process of learning, which never ends. In 2007, Blackwell, Dwick, and others conducted a study in which they educated a group of low-income middle school students about how learning makes you smarter. They showed them studies that demonstrated that the more you learn, the more you're capable of learning in the future. They explained how learning builds. This was correcting the default understanding that intelligence is just a fixed trait. You're either smart or you're dumb. They created an educational program to teach the students that intelligence is not fixed. It's a matter of learning. The children who were taught about learning and how the brain changes later showed noticeable improvements on their math scores, while the control group, who was taught about memory rather than intelligence, did not show an improvement. School curriculum tries to make children smarter without ever giving them any real information they need about how to enjoy learning and believe in their own innate intelligences. Let's break this down. Formal schools box us into a specific and very limited curriculum, while also boxing us into an environment that inhibits creativity and learning in so many different areas of intelligence. Homeschooling can provide a healthier environment with more downtime, human connection, and individually catered learning techniques, but it's also very similar to school in how curriculum teaches us to evaluate our own intelligence and the intelligence of others based on very few intellectual parameters. Unschooling breaks us free of both the unhelpful learning environment and mentality of schools and the misled focus on the curriculum and academic schedule that programs us into thinking that if we can score high enough on a limited IQ test, we can prove ourselves to be worthwhile human beings. However children are taught, there need to be a focus on intrinsic motivation, growth mindset, physical movement, space and time for creative thought, as well as opportunities to advance the school-neglected areas of intelligence Gardner proposed and many we have yet to discover. Before we go, let's take a quick look at the only school I've considered sending my own child to, and why. This is the Peninsula School in Menlo Park, California. I got to experience this amazing school as a nanny of 2 children who began attending while in my care. I was always amazed at what I witnessed students doing when I walked around the campus. So many things I've never seen at any other school. It had so much more of a summer camp vibe than a school vibe. This school focuses on grade-free learning, socio-emotional development, and student choice in natural settings with unstructured play and multi-aged groupings. On the Peninsula School website, the description says, through non-graded and non-competitive academic programs, students focus on self-evaluation and self-improvement, which encourages them to assume more authorship of their own learning and provides them with the confidence to take academic risks and have an impact on the larger world. The website says that upon graduating the Peninsula School and moving on to high school, one child was upset because her fellow students in the new high school were, quote, not interested in learning. They were simply interested in getting better grades, end quote. I feel like this quote does a great job of communicating the ways different schools shape our understanding of intelligence and success as we grow. Her natural love of learning stood out among her new peers. On that note, I'd like to leave you with a question. In choosing your topic to present on for this assignment, did you choose something you felt you could crank out with minimal effort to satisfy requirements and get a decent grade? Or did you use this as an opportunity to learn about something you find interesting? Is your innate childlike love of learning still alive in you, or was it long ago broken down by the way you were taught in schools and what you were programmed to believe intelligence really is? Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. Albert Einstein.